This video will help you understand how risk tolerance should or shouldn't influence your investment portfolio. If you don't know who I am, my name is Chris Dime. I'm a financial planner out of Edmonds, Washington, and I specialize in working with folks to and through retirement. Risk tolerance, simply defined, is one's ability to stomach risk. In the financial space, this approximation is what financial advisors use oftentimes to recommend various investment securities. In this video, we'll cover how I think that is a backwards method of making recommendations, as well as how to use risk tolerance in the context of making financial decisions. So let's jump in. There's no one catch-all definition for the term risk tolerance. It's context dependent. In the terms of choosing a particular vocation, one with a high risk tolerance might be more attracted to sales-oriented roles or entrepreneurship, whereas someone with very low risk tolerance might opt for more of a stable career path with guaranteed inflation, raises, a salary, etc. In the context of investments, however, the term risk tolerance is used to approximate how well someone can handle the volatility associated with particular investments. Simply put, if you wake up one day and your $1 million portfolio is now worth 800 grand, how would that make you feel? Your risk tolerance will dictate how much sleep you would lose if that were to happen. And while there's no perfect science behind approximating risk tolerance, historically the concept of using things like risk tolerance questionnaires, which is a survey of like 10 or 20 questions given various scenarios, to sort of approximate how well would this client feel if XYZ situation were to happen. That was then used as fuel for advisors to make recommendations that matched someone's risk tolerance. Now, historically, when securities were sold for a commission to an advisor, generally the advisor served more as like an order taker, also known as a broker, whereby the client would come to the advisor and say, I'd like to invest $100,000. And before the advisor can make recommendations, the advisor would have the client fill out a survey of, what situations are acceptable to you. And then they would take that risk tolerance, apply it to their menu of different investment options, and then pick the one off the shelf that matched that risk tolerance. Now, was that investment security actually in the best interest of the client or not? Well, if you didn't know anything about their financial goals and you were just an order taker, well then I guess you're in the clear. As the financial space has evolved, at least in our office over the past decade, where nowadays the advisor serves more of a fiduciary professional role in recommending securities to clients, you've seen compliance departments sort of struggle with this conflict. Are advisors order takers from a client, or are advisors making objective recommendations to clients and then clients choosing to accept or not accept their advice? There's a lot of firms that operate in the old model of order taker, and there's a lot of firms nowadays that operate more in the professional capacity. And there's a lot of firms that try to do a combination of the two. And so a lot of times, risk tolerance questionnaires before an advisor can make recommendations are used as a CYA by compliance departments, so much so that if the advisor makes a recommendation and the client is not happy with the outcome of that recommendation, well then that's the client's fault. They chose a particular risk tolerance, the advisor chose from a menu of different funds and recommended one that fits that risk tolerance. In my opinion, this is a very subpar method of delivering a solution to clients, however, because rarely does somebody invest just for the sake of investing. Generally, they're investing for the outcome of accomplishing some financial goal. A lot of times we think about that in the context of retirement, but based on the client's situation, that financial goal could totally be different. Nowadays, rather than having a menu of different investment, securities or products to pick from and having the client self-select their own risk tolerance, in the context of a financial plan, you first want to determine what the financial objectives are for that particular relationship, and then you can reverse engineer the type of security that's needed to get them to financial nirvana. For example, a 30-year-old family that wants to retire in their 60s, if you add up all of their current savings, company matches, you factor in, taxes, you can approximate what rate of return that client needs to achieve in their investment portfolio to accomplish their goals. From there, the advisor can recommend securities that fit within that particular rate of return and have the highest likelihood of success within that rate of return. If this client needs a 10% rate of return to achieve their goals, well then in my opinion, it would be imprudent for the advisor to recommend a safer portfolio. Likewise, if doing all the math, the client actually only needs 7% in returns, the advisor could totally recommend a portfolio that's going to on average earn 10%, but should probably start with recommending the portfolio that has the highest likelihood of achieving their goals, aka the portfolio that on average has done about 7%. Now, past performance is no guarantee of future returns, but it's the most helpful approximation we have as of nowadays until we learn to tell the future. After the recommendation is made, based on what the advisor believes will give the client the highest likelihood of success, then, after disclosing some of the pros and cons of that particular strategy, the client can then make a more informed decision as to whether or not they should or should not accept a particular level of risk. Now, it's well known that older people generally prefer things like CDs, cash, and government bonds because these are guaranteed investment vehicles and or they're super duper safe. However, just because someone might have a particular proclivity towards safer investing, if their goals, reverse engineered, dictate that they need to achieve a higher rate of return than 2 or 3% on their portfolio, well then again, it would be imprudent for the advisor to simply take orders and put all of their life savings into cash or cash equivalents, because that strategy has a very high likelihood of not achieving their financial goals, which for most retirees is not running out of money. The evolution of the industry I've seen over time is that advisors have moved from more of an order taker role to more of a fiduciary professional relationship of making recommendations, but then assuming the liability that comes with making a professional recommendation. In my opinion, this is a much better way of using risk tolerance, which is do all the math, make the objective recommendation, and then let the client determine whether or not they're willing to tolerate that level of risk. It's no different than if you were to hire a legal or medical professional to give you objective advice. For example, when we took our son in for his 3rd ear infection of the year, our goal was to get him healthy and to stop him from getting ear infections in the future. The physician then recommended ear tubes. The physician didn't hand us a risk tolerance questionnaire and then ask us our risk tolerance for getting surgery done. The physician made the objective recommendation, and then it was up to my wife and I to decide if that was something that we were comfortable risk tolerating. The physician didn't read off the risk tolerance questionnaire and say, well, I was going to recommend surgery, but in this box you said you prefer not to have surgery, so instead I'm just going to recommend a warm compress and antibiotics once again. If the physician knew of a solution but withheld the solution, that would be medical malpractice. Now, of course, you as the end consumer don't have to follow the advice of the professional you're hiring. You could get a second opinion, or you could choose to take some other course of action. As long as the course of action is reasonable, the physician may or may not abide by that alternative solution. In the same context of an advisor, if the advisor is recommending a particular portfolio to you, but you're unwilling to accept that level of risk, for example, you might want to take less risk. As long as you and the advisor agree that on average, you're probably not going to achieve the same level of outcome. If you're okay with that, the advisor might be willing to make an accommodation and still perform advisory services. However, if your proposed course of action is completely inappropriate, well then the advisor and or the physician is totally within their professional scope not to take that action. For example, if the physician recommended ear tube surgery for my son and I said, I'm not comfortable with that, I'd rather you just amputate his ear, I would hope the medical professional would not simply say, sounds good, let's do that. Likewise, if I'm going to recommend a particular portfolio to a client and instead of following my recommendation, they want to invest all of their money into penny stocks, that's not something that I would help them take action on. So in conclusion, historically, risk tolerance has been used as a primary method of influencing how the advisor would then go make recommendations. I think that totally needs to flip around. The advisor, in understanding the client's goals and objectives, needs to then reverse engineer the optimal solution to get the client there. And in the context of an investment portfolio, will probably amalgamate to some level of investment security recommendations in that portfolio. From there, the advisor would recommend a particular portfolio. The client would then fully understand pros and cons and expected volatility, and only then would risk tolerance come into play once the client has context in understanding how to apply their risk tolerance. The client can then decide if they do or don't want to implement that advice. In my opinion, it's the advisor's job to recommend the best course of action, assume the fiduciary liability, and then let the client decide if that's risk that they are willing or not willing to tolerate. So from a calls to action standpoint, I'd recommend auditing your investment portfolio to ensure that it aligns with the eventual financial goal that you need to achieve. It's probably a good idea to pull a portfolio off the shelf and dust it off every few years at a minimum, but you'll really only know if your investment portfolio is right for you if you have come to the determination of what to invest into based on your financial plan. So if you don't have a financial plan, that's probably not a bad place to start. There's offices like mine that can help you build and execute a financial plan, but there's also online resources if you're going to take more of a DIY approach and you don't want to work with a professional to approximate the best method of investing your money based on your financial goals. Hopefully that was helpful. If you have further questions, drop them in the comments below or get in touch on the website. We'll help you get squared away. Have an awesome rest of your day. We'll talk to you later. Bye.